We are in the midst of an ever-escalating crisis. Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York recently said we could expect the peak of this pandemic to occur in 45 days, which means initial estimates may be correct that this extends for a few months. Now, I know you've come here to hear about what China is doing, and China poses a very serious threat to the United States, and they've recently announced they will expel several news organizations, many journalists from the United States, amid concerns they've been covering up what's really going on. They're claiming numbers are going down. Many people don't believe them. They've arrested doctors and whistleblowers, journalists. It's what the country does. Now, with the expulsion of American journalists, many people believe they may be actively trying to cover up just how bad things really are. I want to say one thing, and then I want to get into this story. But before I do, there are many naysayers and many people who might not like the president. And so I need to show you two quick segments from mainstream media, notably MSNBC and CNN. The first from the Daily Caller. Joe Scarborough tells viewers to do everything to ensure the president succeeds, going as far as to say they're critical of nearly everything he does. But in this instance, we must support the president if we're going to pull through this. And then surprisingly to me, Dana Bash of CNN said that Donald Trump is being the kind of leader that people need, calling what he's doing extraordinary. Donald Trump is doing a good job, at least for now. Though there are many critics of his early response to the coronavirus, he is seeing praise from two mainstream cable networks that absolutely rag on him day and night. Which brings me to the next point that many people may not want to hear, but I need to say, the president was right about China. He issued warnings going back several years. It's been a part of his campaign. And now we're seeing just how truly terrifying things are getting with China. The New York Times reporting that China announces it will expel American journalists. The announcement comes weeks after President Trump limited the number of Chinese citizens who could work in the United States for 5 state-controlled Chinese news organizations. So they're arguing it's a tit for tat. But in my opinion, based on the actions they've taken in silencing whistleblowers and putting people under house arrest, I think China is trying to cover up just how bad this really is. I also think that within our own government, there are efforts to keep things calm and downplay how bad this actually could be. Now, I'm not going to comment entirely on what we're seeing in the United States because I've done that in several other videos, but I do want to point out exactly how much of a threat China is. They've been sowing disinformation. They've been accusing the U.S. military of seeding the coronavirus, and Chinese trolls online were spreading disinformation in Taiwan. There are now accusations that Chinese troll accounts are intentionally trying to slow the response to the coronavirus in other countries, essentially exploiting this global pandemic for Chinese national gain. It's not about the individuals or their race or ethnicity. It is about the government and their authoritarian actions. The first thing you need to understand, whenever anyone tries to shut out journalists, you can hold that as particularly suspect because, well, as the Washington Post likes to say, democracy dies in darkness. Now, I'm not here to praise many of these news organizations. I think they're worthy of criticism as well. But China, they take the cake, shutting out journalism and arresting and locking up whistleblowers. Let's read the story from the New York Times to see how bad this really is. Before we get started, however, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There are several ways you can give, but the best thing you can do, share this video. I know there are many people who despise and detest the president, but I think right now we can all agree that there is reason to come together and focus on a much larger threat the U.S. faces, and that is China. So even if you disagree with me and think the president wasn't right, you think he was wrong and he's doing a terrible job, I hear you, but please listen to me as I explain to you how bad China really is. They have camps full of people. They are doing horrifying things. They are an authoritarian regime that has been barricading people in their homes. It is rather nightmarish, and they need to be called out for this. Silencing American journalists, though I'm very critical of American journalism, is ridiculously, is awful. It's terrifying, and it says to me they're covering this up, and we need to know why. The New York Times reports, in the latest escalation of tensions between the two superpowers, China announced on Tuesday that it would expel American journalists working for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. It also demanded that those outlets, as well as the Voice of America and Time Magazine, provide the Chinese government with detailed information about their operations. The announcement, made by China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, came weeks after the Trump administration limited the number of Chinese citizens who could work in the U.S. for 5 state-controlled Chinese news organizations to 100. China instructed American journalists, whose press credentials are due to expire before the end of 2020, to notify the Department of Information of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs within 4 calendar days starting from today and hand back their press cards within 10 calendar days. It went on to specify that the American journalists now working in China will not be allowed to continue working as journalists in the People's Republic of China, including its Hong Kong and Macau special administrative regions. The full scope of the directive was not immediately clear. In a translated statement, a Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman said the decisions are entirely necessary and reciprocal countermeasures that China is compelled to take in response to the unreasonable oppression the Chinese media organizations experience in the U.S. They are legitimate and justified self-defense in every sense. What the U.S. has done is exclusively targeting Chinese media organizations and hence driven by a Cold War mentality and an ideological bias. For the longest time, we have been dealing with a serious threat from China. Years ago, way before Donald Trump ever came into politics, I was talking with numerous journalists about the excursions from China into South America and into Africa, oil exploration, the Nicaraguan Canal, things I've brought up in the past, their pressure in the South China Sea, and the expanding military bases in Pacific atolls. China is expanding. They are becoming a dominant economic power. And now it seems that they're trying to exploit the coronavirus for their personal gain. This story from the National Review says we are in the crisis because of the decisions of the Chinese government. Now, recently, a reporter asked Trump if he would continue to use the phrase Chinese coronavirus. I pointed out to you at the beginning of this video that there are mainstream news organizations praising Trump for his actions, for what he is doing now, saying we need to support him. Yet there are still people in the media that would call the Trump a bigot or smear conservatives for referring to the Wuhan coronavirus as the Chinese or Wuhan coronavirus, something they themselves did for several months. And I'll tell you exactly why it's happening, because it originated there. That's it. Trump was angry. He said they've been spreading disinformation, claiming that our military spread this when it in fact came from their country. The National Review says, as a country, we've got our hands full right now, but we're still sitting in various forms of self-quarantine. We and a lot of other people around the world will have a lot of time to read about the Chinese government destroying samples and suppressing information about the coronavirus in December. Chinese laboratories identified a mystery virus as a highly infectious new pathogen by late December last year, but they were ordered to stop tests, destroy samples, and suppress the news, a Chinese media outlet has revealed. A regional health official in Wuhan, center of the outbreak, demanded the destruction of the lab samples that established the cause of unexplained viral pneumonia on January 1st. China did not acknowledge there was human-to-human transmission until more than 3 weeks later. Now in a story from Live Science just a few days ago, the first known case of coronavirus traced back to November in China. We are facing an unprecedented global pandemic. Many people are trying to downplay it, saying it's just like the flu or TB is worse. But in reality, we are looking at something serious, a novel virus, no herd immunity, a potential mortality rate of 3%, in some places even higher. And if it's true that China has been withholding information and lying about what's going on, and it is true, then we can be sure that we don't know as much as we think we do about this virus. We're going to see extended curfews, quarantines, lockdowns. Businesses across the country are being shuttered. This is life for the foreseeable future. And it could have been prevented if China was honest about what was happening. Suffice it to say, the expulsion of American journalists is going to make the situation much, much more dangerous. Live Science says, we knew about it back in November. Now, we have the official statement here from China, which for the most part, I'm not going to read. I gave you the gist of the information from the New York Times story. Now, this is where the true threat of China starts to become visible. The expulsion of American journalists and the lack of information is going to make things worse. There are people in media angry, saying that Trump should not be going after them and criticizing them at a time when we need cooperation. But I don't know if that is appropriate when you have a bully who has been lying to you from the get-go. Giving them what they want won't get you what you need. In a story from Fox News 4 days ago, China hints at denying Americans life-saving coronavirus drugs. Now that the number of new people infected with coronavirus in China is slowing down, the country's Communist Party is ratcheting up threats against the West, with a particularly nasty warning about access to life-saving drugs aimed at the United States. In an article in Xinhua, the state-run media agency that's largely considered the mouthpiece of the party, Beijing bragged about its handling of COVID-19. a virus that originated in the city of Wuhan and has spread quickly around the world. They say the article claimed that China could impose pharmaceutical export controls, which would plunge America into the mighty sea of coronavirus. You may have seen me talk about this in another video where I said Trump warned us about China, and he was right. The challenge I have in producing a video like this is that there's going to be a lot of people who just hate Trump because, well, there's a lot of reasons people hate Trump. The reality is, though, whether you like his attitude or not, whether you're concerned about his policies or not, he's been warning since before he got elected that China was a threat. For me, I've known about this because of my work in journalism. Many people who don't like him, you're going to need to get over this because this is reality right now. China has control of our manufacturing. Even Bernie Sanders has called it out. And now is the time for us to come together and recognize this. China is the real threat. We can get back to arguing about Bernie, healthcare, Biden, Trump, once we've dealt with this virus. But so long as China is withholding information and expelling our journalists, it's going to be increasingly difficult to do. It also should show us if they're going to kick out our journalists and they're then going to say that they could even deny us medication because they control manufacturing, the threat is real. House Republicans press for hearing on threat China poses to U.S. pharmaceutical industry. There's a story from just the other day in the Washington Examiner. The good news is that with these threats, we are now seeing bipartisan support to a certain degree to call out this threat being posed to the U.S. The Examiner reports, Republicans on the House Oversight Committee demanded that Democrats schedule a hearing to look into the threat of relying on China for medicines used in the United States. Striking a sense of urgency, a letter signed by Ranking Member Jim Jordan of Ohio, Rep. Chip Roy of Texas, and 12 other Republicans argued the coronavirus pandemic has brought this issue to a head. The outbreak of COVID-19 has highlighted a critical threat to the domestic supply of life-saving prescription drugs. Too many supply chains for our most critical medicines and medical devices are too dependent on China, said the letter addressed to Oversight Committee Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney. The U.S. is a leader in pharmaceutical development, yet global supply chains rely so heavily on China that the recent COVID-19 outbreak has resulted in alarming shortages in the United States. The last U.S. plant to make ingredients for penicillin, for example, announced it would shutter in 2004, while Chinese companies have supplied 90% of antibiotics, vitamin C, ibuprofen, and hydrocortisone to the U.S. The Chinese have been attacking America on multiple fronts for far too long to allow our critical healthcare supply chain to be utterly dependent on them. We need to look into this for options immediately, Roy told the Washington Examiner. The spread of the coronavirus has ignited a new push for the Trump administration to urge pharmaceutical companies in the country to cut their reliance on China for drugs and medical devices. Now, this is something that's kind of a bit funny as we move on and keep the focus back on what's going on as it pertains to information. First, we'll wrap up that last little bit. Trump has been warning about giving away our manufacturing. That is his thing. Trump has talked about trade, NAFTA, and TPP, China. He's called it out. And now we're seeing the true danger of relying on China. They have our medicine. If they pressed us, declared war, or even pressed on a militaristic front, what could we do? If they cut off our supply, we're going to lose 90% of our medicine, our vitamin C. That's absolutely insane. Now, I know I said it's very serious. They're kicking out U.S. journalists from China, but there's some bad news for Americans, sort of. While we are concerned that China is lying about what's going on, and I think they are, absolutely. We've seen evidence of it already. In a recent research study by Edelman, they found most trusted spokespeople, scientists, health officials, and doctors, the percent who trust each information source to tell the truth about the virus. They asked people how much trust do they have in particular individuals, and they found that journalists rank the lowest when it comes to information about the coronavirus. This is a shame, but it's a depiction of the sad state of media trust in this country. People do not trust journalists, and that is a serious problem, especially right now. And I'll tell you why. People are shocked to see MSNBC and CNN now giving support to the president because, as Joe Scarborough said, they're critical of nearly everything he does. Well, how can that be possible? Everything he does is bad? Look, I've routinely given credit for Ocasio-Cortez when she called out big tech surveillance, Elizabeth Warren when she said these gigantic tech monopolies are a threat. I've agreed with them on many of these issues. And when AOC and Ted Cruz had come together on lobbying efforts, I also gave them credit. Now, they typically give the president credit on some occasions as well. But if you have a media that just absolutely, these major networks, hyper-focused on why he's bad, of course people won't trust you. Now, here's what's funny. Scientists and my doctor rank the highest. CDC officials and WHO officials come next. Interestingly, a person like yourself is in sixth place with 63% trust, and journalists have 43%. People just don't trust the press. So look, it's really bad that China is kicking out our journalists. This is a major escalation in tensions between these two, our country and theirs. But I think even though that's a really bad thing, well, people don't trust the press. And I'll show you why. Al Jazeera, they say, outrage as Trump calls the coronavirus Chinese virus. Some accuse the U.S. president of trying to deflect critics from his slow response to the outbreak. Or how about this story from Politico? Trump aides pound on China. Health experts say, please stop. The coronavirus is deepening the rift between Beijing and Washington at a time when cooperation is needed most. False claims about sources of coronavirus cause spat between U.S. and China. I'm sorry. There have been too many instances of high-profile personalities and people in the media trying to defend China. And you know what? I'm never going to understand why, unless they're in the pocket of these of Chinese interests. We've already learned, and maybe you've seen the stories I covered in the past, several academics are being arrested for taking cash from China and not reporting it. These people are in on the take. Dare I say it's almost espionage, though I don't think they're going that far. But some of these people are conducting research at universities and providing that information to the Chinese government, an adversarial government that has essentially exacerbated this crisis and many others. A country that has been engaging in cyber attacks, suppressing its own people, doing many, many things that are rather horrifying that I can't even talk about. And one of the latest bits from ABC News. In a series of tweets Thursday and Friday, Zhao Lijian promoted the theory without evidence. I love that they do that, by the way. Without evidence, that the U.S. military is responsible for the pandemic by bringing it to China last October, giving new fodder for a narrative that's churned on the Chinese internet. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has meanwhile branded the outbreak the Wuhan virus, named for the Chinese city where coronavirus first started to spread. So we understand the context of that story. But now we can go to the story from March 5th, BuzzFeed. Just about 2 weeks ago, Chinese trolls are spreading disinformation on the coronavirus in Taiwan. Even in 5 years of looking at troubling disinfo every day, I'm not sure I've ever seen anything quite this malicious. This is BuzzFeed reporting this. The message appeared on Facebook at the end of February, each making the same explosive claim. Taiwan's government had lied about the number of coronavirus infections and deaths. The posts, written in Mandarin, claimed an unnamed Taiwanese legislator was secretly revealing the cover-up. I'm really angry right now. Don't the Taiwanese deserve to know these things? I'm not going to get into the complexities of the story. I just want to point out that they're absolutely manipulating and restricting information, which is making the crisis worse. These people, this government it's something else. It is despicable and, dare I actually say, evil. What they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims and what they're doing to these other countries is horrifying. From The Guardian, 1 month old, back in February, doctor who exposed the SARS cover-up is under house arrest in China, family confirms. They said the Chinese military surgeon who exposed the government's cover-up of the SARS epidemic in 2003 has been under de facto house arrest since last year, according to his friends and family. The fate of 88-year-old Dr. Zhang Yanyang, a retired general in the People's Liberation Army, has been brought into the spotlight after a whistleblower, Dr. Li Wenliang, who exposed the coronavirus epidemic, died last Friday at the age of 34. Another story from the New York Times. Coronavirus outrage spurs China's internet police into action. We can see that China is lying to the world about the coronavirus outbreak, and they are causing the crisis to become worse. I don't know what it would take to get people on board with what Trump has been saying about China being a serious threat, but I certainly understand it. He was right. I think for me, as someone who's covered these stories going back several years, I totally get it. And now that we're in the midst of a crisis exacerbated by the Chinese government, it's easy for us to understand just how bad it really is. Now we're seeing the true ramifications on our electoral system. The coronavirus outbreak has made voting in Illinois today a full mess. And this is where things start getting scary. A government that knew they had an outbreak of novel virus, restricted information, arrested whistleblowers, barricaded people in their homes, and is now expelling journalists while they're sowing disinformation online and censoring speech in their own country. And it's wreaking havoc on our economy, taking a massive hit, nearly 30%, dropping 9,000 or so points, one of the worst point drops in history in a single day. Our elections are being postponed and jammed up. It is becoming a nightmare. I'm not going to play these conspiracy games and act like China did it on purpose. Some people think so. I don't. I think, like any politician or any government, they're not going to let a good crisis go to waste. We're seeing some truly despicable actions from politicians in our own countries, trying to implement these permanent measures in response to a temporary crisis. But I think it's fair to point out China is making this worse to benefit themselves, and now we are facing the brunt of it. It's about time we listen to what Trump was saying. We bring back manufacturing to this country, which has been happening. We get a hold on our own medical production. We secure our borders, and we stop acting like we live in a utopian society where everyone is a good guy. And it's about time we called out these people in media and celebrities who keep ponying up to China for whatever reason. I just don't know. I hope it made it clear to you why this threat is so serious. Maybe this video is a bit more boring than usual, but look, we got to take it seriously, whether or not you're left, right, whatever. China is going to slowly overtake our economic control. And some people might like that, whatever. I don't. This is a country that does horrifying things. And it's about time we call them out at the very least. The United States doesn't need to be the world police, but we do need our own medicine and our own manufacturing and our own medical supplies. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment will be at 6 p.m. youtube.com/TimCastNews, and I will see you all then.